Good day, and welcome to Viva the Village. My name is John Baillie. I'm going to host this program regarding a resident that lived here in Leisure Village, in Village 44. He passed away this past October, about 10 days before he was going to be 92 years old. I met Charles Pierce when I was interviewing him on my radio show, and he really impressed me as being a very wonderful, generous, and loving human being. After spending 6 years in a concentration camp, he has no hate and absolutely has an awful lot of forgiveness and love for humanity. And today, his son, Mark Pierce, was able to do a documentary about Charles Pierce, and it is called B1719, which is a serial number that was tattooed on his left arm. Mark, welcome.
Thanks, John. Nice to be here.
I think this is a great opportunity to talk about your dad, who I think is a wonderful human being and a very loving man, considering what he went through. Let's start at the beginning.
Sure.
His childhood, where he was brought up in Poland.
Sure. My dad was born in Kielce, Poland. He was one of 5 brothers. He was second from the youngest. He had a normal childhood when he was growing up until the Nazis came to Poland. He played in the park, he rode bikes, he played ball. Being one of 5 brothers, there was always somebody to play with. But while he was growing up, he was already experiencing some anti-Semitism. And then in 1939, the Nazis invaded Poland, and they sent him to the ghetto. And my dad could tell you about that.
Shall we watch? Let's watch now.
And then when the war broke out, the first thing we noticed that the Gestapo is all over, and they came to our house, apartment where we lived, because they were told that we hiding some things or whatever. About 6 of them came. 2 of them were German Jews. I still remember their names. One was Schlesinger and the other one was Singer. They knocked on our door in the house. Not knock, but banging, that I thought the door is going to break down. And we had to open it. We were a few people in the house, and they grabbed me, or my parents and stuff. They took me out down the street. The building was full of trash, glass and cans and all kinds of things. And we had to pick up all this by hand and throw it on a truck. While we were doing that, in between we were beaten on our backs. Then they took us outside the city to dump this on an open field. My back was hurt, was black and blue. And when we got that outside the city to throw that trash off the trucks, there was target shooting right near us, just to scare the people. But at that point, I didn't know if I'm going to be shot or not.
Now let's talk about Charles Pierce's life and how it was corrupted in his world.
Well, when the Nazis came into Poland, they moved all the people into a ghetto. There were 20,000 people in an area of just a couple of blocks. And there used to be Polish people living there. They moved them out. And they gave, they just took all the people that were living in Kielce and surrounding areas and moved them all together. They mistreated them. They barely fed them, just enough to keep them sustained and calm. They put some people in charge here that were the Jewish police, but they really had no power. It was just a ploy to keep them calm. And then after being there for a period of time, they decided to liquidate that ghetto, and my dad could tell you about that.
Shall we watch now?
The end of August 1942 was a real nightmare. They woke us in the middle of the night. They wake us with loudspeakers they had outside and said, "Get out, get out." And in German, everything German. And we had no choice. We had nothing to fight back with. So we just went out like, if a woman didn't want to leave their babies behind, the baby and the mother was shot. Came middle of the night, yelling, screaming with machine guns, and they took us out and marched us out to the railroad in groups of 10. They had an order to leave 1,500 people in the ghetto to clean up the ghetto and work. So they pulled out the people that they wanted, and I yelled out that I work on the stone quarry, so they put me aside. My brother Abe had a different place that he worked already, so he was going to go with that group to get killed. But they needed 50 more people to leave to work. So he was pulled out by miracle from that group and put with me. The trains that they loaded the people on were freight trains filled with 120 people in the train with no bathrooms, no water. They loaded up the freight trains. People couldn't even sit down or kneel down, just standing up. And after they closed the train, the boxcars, they sprayed with lime and chlorine. So by the time they got to that Treblinka camp, 75% or more people were dead.
Let's talk about the time he worked in concentration camps.
My dad was put into the concentration camps, and he was put into a canvas factory. And the reason they put him in there is because he had some experience working on canvas shoes. His dad employed over 100 people in Poland, and they had a big shoe manufacturing and retail business. And the Nazis used the people to the best of their ability, and he was making shoes for the Nazis to wear during the war. And then he had some experiences in Auschwitz that were pretty devastating. And again, my dad could elaborate more on that.
Let's watch now.
I found out that the day before we came, 20,000 gypsies were killed, taken to the crematorium. The reason that I asked, because the floor of the barrack was covered with, had with them. They couldn't do anything because they had no weapons. Surrounded with machine guns and all kinds of things, what can you do? They were taken to the crematorium. That was the first place that I went in.
Recalling my history of Auschwitz, Dr. Joseph Mengele was stationed there. He experimented on an awful lot of the prisoners and used them as guinea pigs. And in turn, at Auschwitz, that is where millions of people lost their lives, in the gas chamber. Tell us about your dad.
Well, when my dad was in Auschwitz, he actually came face to face with Joseph Mengele, just about as close as you and I are sitting to each other. And Mengele and a few of his helpers made all the prisoners come out of the barracks, stand naked with their palms faced up, stick out their tongues, and Mengele would walk up and down the aisles. And he'd stop in front of each prisoner. When he pointed to the left, you remained alive. When he pointed to the right, you went to the crematorium. It was as simple as that. There was no reasoning behind it.
So he was a judge.
He was the judge, the jury, and the executor all in one. And my dad witnessed some of the experiments that he performed on the people there. One man, they took all the veins out of his legs, and my dad saw this man walking, and he walked like he had fake legs. He did all these horribly cruel and unimaginable experiments to people. And then, after being in Auschwitz for a while, they came in and they put the tattoo on his left forearm, the B1719. And that was a sign that they were going to use my dad for work and not send him to the crematoriums, because they wouldn't waste the time putting that on. But it was a way of belittling the people. They were now numbers rather than people and
They were
names.
property.
And so my dad could tell you about his tattoo.
Let's watch now.
Then one day they decided to come into the barrack and they put a tattoo on my hand, which I have still to this day on my left arm. And the number is B1719. And that tattoo saved my life, because by having this tattoo, they send out the people to work again. And after being there a few months, I was sent out to Germany to work.
Your dad could not talk about his experiences for several years, and I understand Steven Spielberg wanted to know about your dad's history. When did he start talking about his experiences?
Well, like you said, Spielberg contacted him about 15 years ago, and my dad wasn't ready to talk publicly about his experiences. He kept everything bottled up inside. But, you know, as kids growing up, we saw the tattoo on his arm, we would ask him questions. He would have a one-sentence answer, and that was the end of the subject. He just wouldn't talk about it. And then about 6 years ago, when my dad was 85 years old, he was asked by my daughter, Lindsay, who was a 10th grade student at Camarillo High School, to come and tell his experiences to her class because they were learning about the Holocaust. And at that time, it was the first time he spoke publicly about his experience. He went in there, my mom and I sat by his side, he told the story, cried through most of it. It was really tough to watch, and he did that for a couple of years. And then after doing that, I volunteered to him if he would write his story down for me, I would read his story, and then he could answer all the questions that the kids had. And when we started doing that, the head of the history department of the Oxnard Union School District found out about it, and we started speaking to all of the high schools, all of the 10th grade, not just one class. And for the last 4 years, we were speaking to about 4,000 to 5,000 people, students mostly, a year, telling his story.
Mark, your dad's parents and grandparents were murdered, weren't they?
Yeah, when the Nazis were liquidating the ghetto, they would line people up in rows of 10 and at the boxcars. And my dad was standing there alongside his parents, and then the Nazis pulled my dad out of the line, took his younger brother out of the line, and my grandparents, his parents, and another brother and his wife were marched right to the boxcars. My dad never even had a chance to say goodbye to his parents or even give them a hug. And, you know, then my dad's life of hell for the next 4 or 5 years began after that took place. And that was the last time he saw his family. He had one other brother that was pulled out that survived the war also. But one thing my dad is grateful for is the American Army, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be sitting here telling you the story, because he would have never survived this war.
When the Americans rescued your dad, how much did he weigh?
At that time, he weighed 60 pounds. He was basically just bones. From Auschwitz, which is where he spent a large amount of his time, he was sent over to Dachau, And at the end of the war, the Nazis were beginning to lose the war. When they found out about this, they wanted to save themselves. So they left Dachau. One of the SS men grabbed a hold of my dad and said, "Push this cart for me." And in the cart was all of his belongings. And so my dad walked out of Dachau with this SS man by his side. And they marched for a couple of days. And I don't know if the guy knew where he was going, but he just didn't want to be there because he knew the Americans were coming. And then one night, this SS man just walked away from my dad and left him on his own. He probably figured he was going to die anyway at 60 pounds. And so my dad crawled into a barn, spent the night in a barn, and the next morning the lady who owned that farm came in because she knew there were some people in there and said, "The American tanks are here." And my dad could hear the rumbling of the ground, and he crawled out of that barn, grabbed a stick to try to walk with, and then the Army stopped their tanks, picked him up and put him into an ambulance and sent him to a hospital in Germany for recovery.
How long was he in recovery?
He probably spent a total of about 6 months. He was at the first hospital, I believe it was called Schwabing in Germany, and then they sent him off to another one, about 3 months each. He'd spent a little bit of time in a convalescent home, just kind of regaining his strength and building himself up. And one thing he always said was that the nurses in the hospital were actually nuns wearing their habits, and they took care of him, no questions asked, and brought him back to life again. And then he was out on his own after that.
After Charles Pierce came to the United States, and all the torture and all the starvation that he went through, he never had any hate in his body. And that always impressed me. And one of the things that was very interesting is that your best man at your wedding was German,
Yes.
and you married a gal that is Polish,
Yes, Christian Polish.
Christian Polish.
Yes. Yeah, my dad, he was pretty amazing. You know, we grew up in Brooklyn, New York, and we lived in a high-rise apartment building. He had, there were different people that lived in that building of all races, and one of my families that I played with, their kids, was an African-American family, and they had 4 kids, and they were like my best friends growing up. My dad never once said anything that I couldn't be friends with them because they were different. And then, like you said, when I came to California and I met a guy, and he was became my best friend at that time, and he was German. He was the best man at my wedding. And then when I met my wife, who I've been married to for 30 years now, she's Christian Polish. My dad never once said that you can't be with these people because they're different, especially from those races, because they were so cruel to him back in Poland. But he knew in his heart that not everybody's like that. A lot of people were forced to be like that. And he raised us with love in his heart. As a matter of fact, when we were on your show, you were listening to his story of the way he's so full of love, and you gave him the title, the Ambassador of Love. And we thought that was so appropriate because he is the Ambassador of Love. You know, now that he passed, and I was designing his tombstone, and on there is engraved the Ambassador of Love, because that's who my dad was, and that's who he was when we were growing up. But growing up, he was a guy to show of, you know, more about showing his love than speaking his love. He never said a lot because he had a hard time getting words out, I'm sure, from what he went through. But having my mom, who's so full of love and just radiates it, you know, the kids that we talked to, they would yell out from the audience, "Mrs. Pierce, you're beautiful." She says she's never thought of herself as beautiful, but it's what's within. And that's what they showed us. And my dad has a message that, you know, he wants to deliver to everybody that's heard his story, and he can tell you his message.
This message, I believe, is for all mankind. And we should learn from Charles Pierce what forgiveness and love is all about. Let's watch.
The way you think and the way you make it, you arrange everything. No matter how bad times I went through and my bad past, I think positive and look at the world in a bright side. Be nice to people, love people, and think that you're gonna become somebody in life.
Charles Pierce's message is just unbelievable. And we should be very delighted that we can hear what is in his heart so we can learn from him. And when your dad started talking about his experiences and you started reading his notes, how did the book came to pass?
Well, it's kind of a funny story. I met a gentleman by the name of Jack Marlando, and he happens to be a professional writer. And he asked me what I did for a living. This is about 4 years ago. And I had just retired from my business. And he looks at me, and I told him I was retired. And he says, well, you can't be retired. You're way too young for that. I said, well, I go around with my dad, and we tell his stories at the high schools and different venues. And he says, well, what's the story? And when I told it to him, he says, well, do you have it written down? Which I did at that time because my dad had already put it down for me to read. So he asked if he can read it. When I gave him that, it was only about 14 pages typed, and he read the story, and he says, this needs to be put down in a book. He says, would you like me to write a book for your dad? And so I went to my dad and asked him if he wants an autobiography written, and he said yes. So between my dad giving Jack all the information and Jack's ability to write so well, the book, The Art of Survival, was produced. I actually published it. It was my first book ever I published, but it turned out pretty nice. And everybody who reads it says in 2 days they read it from cover to cover. They can't put it down when they start reading it. And the first half of the book is about all his experiences in the war. But the second half of the book is about his ability to forgive and to love, and how he put all that behind him is really beyond me. But he was able to do it, and he's pretty remarkable that way. And my dad actually inspired me to write a book called The ABCs of Loving, and it's a book all about love. And being raised by two parents that were just so full of love their whole life, it was pretty easy to put together a book on love. So.
And the documentary, which is 58 minutes long,
Yes.
and you've seen excerpts from the documentary, B1719. How did that come about?
Well, we were at the Point Mugu Naval Base telling my dad's story to the enlisted soldiers there, to all the soldiers that were there, and he. The guy who was in charge of the audiovisual department, his name is Shane Davis, he came up to me after hearing my dad's story, and he says, your story is phenomenal. He says, I'm a big history buff, but your story is phenomenal. I'd like to make a documentary for you. Would you like it done? And so here again, here's somebody completely out of the blue, we never met before, volunteering to do this story, because that's how moving the story is. And so between Shane Davis, Jack writing out a bunch of questions for my dad to answer in the documentary, Mike DiMartino wrote an original music score. Mike is married to Tracy Lair. She's a newscaster from KEYT TV in Santa Barbara. She did the editing. And myself producing it, we put together my dad's documentary. And it's really professionally done. And now we have this so we can still continue going around and telling my dad's story to the same people that we were talking to before. Unfortunately, he won't be there to answer questions, but it's him telling the story, not me telling the story. So that part of it is, I think, better because it's coming from his mouth. And I'll answer the questions as best as I can. I mean, I didn't live through it, but I've been with my dad long enough and know the story pretty well that I think I could answer most questions of what people want to know.
If people want to know more about Charles Pierce, about his book, about the documentary, they can go to the website?
Yes, we have a website. It's www.thesurvivalstation.com. It's THE SurvivalStation.com. And on there you'll see clips of the documentary, all the places that we spoke to, some TV interviews, your radio show interview that when we were on your radio show before. I just keep everything up to date, and all of the different venues we're going to be showing the documentary at will be listed on there. So if people want to come see it, they just have to let me know. Most of these theaters have somewhat limited seating, but 400 or 500 people can come see it at any given time.
If you ever want to meet a man, know about a man, you should read the book or see the documentary, because I think it's a wonderful experience. And you'll come back with a feeling of just being human and what we are going through today compared to what Charles Pierce went through. He was, without a doubt, the ambassador of love. Mark, thank you very much for being here and telling us about your wonderful dad. And I would like to thank everybody for watching Viva the Village. Hope you have a great day, and by all means, stay well.